Okay. Aloha to our candidates, our directors, and our guests. I'm Greg Misakian, president of Kokua Council, and we want to welcome everyone to today's Kokua Council Candidate Forum. This is our second one we are hosting today, with more scheduled during the general election cycle. Today, we welcome Carole, Kaapu, and Ikaika Hussey, who are the candidates competing to be the next State House District 29 representative. This seat, which was vacated in December 2023 when Representative John Matsuoka was appointed to be the state's coordinator of homelessness, is currently being held by May Matsuoka, who was appointed by the governor and assumed office in January of 2024. We are looking forward to learning more about the candidates and their positions on the many important issues that impact State House District 29 and Hawaii. Lila Mower, the former president of Kokua Council and current president emerita, will be the moderator today. I introduce Lila, who will begin the candidate forum.
Aloha, mahalo for joining us. I'm Lila Mower, serving as today's moderator. Candidates will alternate as to who first answers the question. So the first question will be answered by Carole, followed by Ikaika. And the second question will be answered first by Ikaika, then followed by Carole, and so on. If candidates will look in your chat box, I will post the questions. So this is our first question. Please tell us about yourself, your background, and experiences qualifying you as a House representative for District 29, which includes Kamehameha Heights, Kalihi Valley, and a portion of Kalihi.
Aloha mai kako. I am Carole Kaapu, and I am a longtime resident involved in this community, went from preschool through high school, mai to Kamehameha, and then have worked in the area and lived in the area for most of my life for many years, many years. I'm currently a member of Neighborhood Board 14. I've been on the board for about over a decade. I'm also on the Lanakila Multipurpose Senior Center Board, where I have been also for over a decade. I also volunteer with the Red Cross. And as for work, I have worked in the legislature for 8 sessions. My focus has been on housing and agriculture. And 4 of those sessions was as a legislative analyst. So writing, reading, processing legislation, and helping our legislators to know what they're voting on and to what kinds of questions to ask and what to look for. I've also worked for New Hope Christian Fellowship. I've worked with the Red Cross as the preparedness manager, worked with Kamehameha Schools preschools, and I'm currently the director of operations with Kalihi Union Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ikaika, you're next.
Hey, thank you very much, Kokua Council, for the invitation for us both to participate this afternoon. So I live in Kalihi Valley, so on the Kalihi side of the district, and I live here with 3 kids and my spouse and a dog and 2 cats currently. 20 some odd years ago, I worked at the Capitol. I was a budget analyst in the finance committee, and my kuleana there was the DOE budget, which is the single largest piece of the state budget, of the operations side of the budget at least. And then subsequent to that, I served as the education committee clerk for the education committee. So working on the policy side of the DOE. And after working at the legislature, I then worked as a teacher, and then many years as an entrepreneur, business owner, owning a media company. At one point, we ran a magazine that we're really proud of it. It had actually international distribution, and it was a lot of fun. And then I also have experience in the clean energy space, doing energy development for community-owned green energy projects. I have a small startup that works on decarbonization technology. And the point in bringing this all up is just to say that I like working on hard problems, some of the biggest problems that face us: climate change, education. I serve on the board of a nonprofit called the Hawaii Housing Development Corporation that just focuses on building like truly affordable housing. Most of it is senior housing. I'm the treasurer of the Domestic Violence Action Center, which plays a really critical role in helping women get out of really bad domestic situations. So I've sort of devoted my adult life, at least, to working for our community in various ways, in whatever way I can be most useful. And that's really what drives me. And thank you very much for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you. All right, Ikaika, you'll start this answer. Sorry, you'll be the first to respond to this question. What are the top 3 issues that impact your district? And what will you do to address each of them if elected?
Okay. Well, let's see. I would say that there's a chronic underinvestment in our district. And I think Carole would probably agree. There's a lot of places in Kalihi and Kapalama which simply have no sidewalks, have not had major infrastructure investments in decades. And there's things we can do on that. We have a whole plan around trying to get the folks who are currently parking on what should be sidewalks to find them dedicated parking areas so that we can sort of liberate these easements for actual pedestrian use. We have a whole plan. But then also there's kind of bigger meta problems around the budget in general. Like, for instance, we did some research and found that Kalihi actually pays a higher amount in property taxes on a per kind of house assessed value than much wealthier areas like Kahala or Hawaii Kai. Because in those areas, you have properties that trade at like $5 or $7 million, but are assessed at several $1,000,000 discount. And so the property taxes are actually, we actually sort of subsidize those wealthier areas. To me, that's a basic equity problem. And like I was mentioning earlier, you know, I did a lot of work on the budget. I really think that the budget is really the main thing that is our job at the legislature, is to pass one big bill, which is, you know, billions of dollars. We need to make sure that that money is spent well, that it's allocated fairly, appropriately, you know, in a smart way. And I'm concerned about the impacts of the 2024 tax cut, that the impact that that'll have on future years in terms of in the budget. And I want to make sure that we make that tax cut revenue neutral. I think that's very important. I don't want to see cuts to core services that we all depend on.
Thank you. Carole, your answer?
I think first and foremost is the cost of living. It has gone, it's crazy. It's hard to buy a $9 gallon of milk. It just doesn't make sense. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There's no one easy solution to that, but certainly bringing down the GE tax on food and medicine would be a real small but significant first step. And I'm not as concerned as Ikaika is about giving money back in the tax cuts, because it has been shown that when people receive more money in their paycheck, they spend it. It goes right back into the economy, which gets taxed again, which then continues. And so it doesn't end up being a big revenue neutral, but it allows people to be able to buy their milk and their eggs. So that's one. And two would be the support of local businesses, small businesses. I think we really did a disservice to our small businesses in the last couple of years when COVID locked down the small ones and allowed Costco to keep going, right? And so our small businesses are hurting. We really need to support them. We really need to reduce regulations and allow them to do what they do, which is provide for their families, provide for their communities. And then crime is continuing to rise all over the island. And I think that that's something that we need to address. And a lot of that stems from mental health issues in a lot of our houseless individuals. They're not able to function in our society. And so they do whatever they need to survive, which ends up impacting our community. And so I really appreciate what Honolulu has done with the core program and think that that's something that could be expanded.
Thank you very much, Carol. All right, the next question. With increasing property values in parts of your district due to the development of the rail line, what are your plans to retain Kalihi's working class neighborhoods? So Carol, you're first on this one.
It's interesting. I think that our property values have gone up, not just because of the rail line, but because of the lack of housing. And so if 5 people want to buy your house, the price goes up. And I think that we can do a lot more with incentivizing and helping people who are homeowners living in their home to afford to live there. So the city's tax credit, which very few people know about and less people take advantage of, helps homeowners to have reduced property tax. Mine goes down $200 a month every time I submit it, right? So, but it takes some time, it takes some knowledge. I've been teaching our kupuna about that and telling them, you know, really, here's something you can do and it will help on your day to day, like every day. And so I'm not as concerned about the rail increasing the property values as I am of people being able to stay in their homes, because when your property value increases, that's equity. But when we don't build enough housing, then nobody can live there. So that becomes a problem. So there's that balance between building more and helping people to be able to afford that. And what causes a lot of the problems is on the city level with all the regulations. If it takes 1.5 years to get a permit to build a house, that's too long. On the mainland, it takes like 20 minutes.
Thank you, Carol. Ikaika, your response, please.
So I think it's good to point out the existing program around the property tax abatement for senior citizens. I think what we need to figure out, though, Carol, is new ideas that are going to, you know, add to that existing benefit. One of those that I think we need to discuss is changing the way that rail itself is paid for. Rail is very expensive, as you may have noticed, and I would actually like us to take a page out of how rail is funded in places like in Japan or in Hong Kong, where rail is paid for through the future property tax values using what's called a tax increment financing, where instead of the cost of rail being borne by today's taxpayers, you essentially float a bond against the future value, and that allows you to essentially not burden the existing group of taxpayers today. That's a method that I think that we should be considering for rail. There's a whole series of ideas, though, that I think we need to also look at in terms of keeping the kind of local character of our neighborhoods, keeping the working class character. And I do think that tax cuts are a good idea, especially when they're targeted to things like incentivizing the sale from one local family to another local family of a long-term family property. You know, we have that all throughout our area where families have been there for decades, you know, sometimes since the subdivision was originally developed, but there's a lot of pressure to sell to like a Chinese investor, for instance. And I think we should be looking at, for instance, a targeted capital gains incentive that would wipe out capital gains for folks who are local family that wants to sell to another local family, so that they don't have the burden of paying for the tremendous increase in their property values over the past several decades.
Thank you very much. All right, here is your next question. How well is your district doing concerning education? Funding received and overall test scores of the students, if known to you. What shortfalls, if any, are there? And if so, what is needed to improve the education of students? Ikaika, that question starts with you.
Thanks for asking. So actually, I was just reviewing some of the recent test scores and performance of the schools in our district: Farrington, Kaliuka, Kalihi Elementary, etc. And I'm really proud of the academic performance in our schools. Where I see the most glaring opportunities for improvement, shall we say, is actually not in the students. It's really in the infrastructure. It's in the deferred maintenance for our school facilities. It's in the fact that, Farrington still does not have air conditioning in all of its classrooms. We have our neighborhood board meet at Kaiwai Elementary from time to time. There's no air conditioning there. There's no air conditioning is it my elementary, Carole, where your neighborhood board meets, right? That is a core kind of basic thing that we need to just install and get going for our schools. And by contrast, if we look at the private schools, that is a really common thing, is to have air conditioning. And you think about this from the perspective of the child, from the perspective of the young people in those schools. Every year, they are seeing higher and higher temperatures. We are surpassing the highest exceeded temperature rate every year, which means that this temperature that we're experiencing today is actually the lowest temperature that our young people are going to see in their lifetimes. I mean, it's crazy to think that this heat is actually going to be considered to be cold from the perspective of their life, in their lifetimes. It's a horrible thought. So at the basic thing, the minimum thing for these kids is we need AC. Carole, you can take the rest of my time.
I think that we have really dedicated teachers in our district who serve a very diverse population. Hawaii, most diverse state in the nation. Kalihi, most diverse community in the state. So most diverse in the United States. And I think that our teachers and our educators work very hard to deal with that diversity. And I really appreciate all that they do. So I think we need to support what they're doing. I think we need to support the educators in providing for them. One of the things I really enjoyed at Kamehameha, both as a student long ago and at working in the preschool, was that if there was a resource we needed, we got it. And that's not true on the DOE side. To get resources that are needed takes lots of time and somebody to really push that. Whereas there's people don't have that time. They're busy teaching, they're busy in the classroom, they're busy dealing with the day-to-day. So I think that just providing resources is one of the main things that the state can do to increase our students being able to excel at school. Because the one thing that we have, I think, that is more so than in many places, is the parents want their children to excel. Our parents know the value of education and they want them to. So there's that push from the family that education is important. So we should be focusing on what we need to give them the best education we can.
Thank you, Carole. The next question is yours. One of the most pressing issues for the state is a lack of affordable housing. This year's Act 39 increases the capacity for greater density in communities with qualified residential zoning. Does this act address or exacerbate the problem of affordable housing? What is your understanding of the housing and affordability issues? And what will you do to introduce legislation to make housing more affordable for all?
So as I said earlier, I think between the county and the state, there's different roles, right? And the county is where I think right now we have the bottleneck. At work, we're working on getting a permit to fix toilets that don't work. They actually posted on their website that the average time for that permit to go through is 265 days. To fix toilets, you need toilets, okay? They're important. So ours is not taking that long yet, but the fact that they're even putting that, the average time is 265 days. One of the houses down the street was, the builders put up a sign and said, we're waiting for a permit. They waited for a year and a half. So that's on the county level. So that's a little bit harder for the state to regulate, but the state can help in creating like this act that allows, that kind of pushes the county to develop more. I can't say that the county's not doing anything. They've passed a few legislations, and I went to the opening of a affordable housing rental unit where they built 25 units in 8 months. Okay, it is possible, but there has to be a relaxing of the regulations surrounding that for that to happen. And so there's lots of, on the state side, it's encouraging. It's we are, I don't know that we are, but I call us the monster home capital of the world. But it's not true. There are monster homes everywhere. But if we allowed them to build them into apartment buildings, we would collect GE taxes, we would collect the sewer fees, we would collect all that we need for that. But instead we say, oh, no more apartments. Okay.
Thank you, Carole. Ikaika, your turn.
Well, I'm wondering maybe if the moderator, if you're interested in asking follow-up questions to Carole, because what I hear is sort of two perspectives on the GE tax. Like, for instance, do you want the GE tax to be collected on housing or not, Carole?
I want so GE tax for in my house, right? I have my house and I have my ADU. And so my renters, I pay GE tax on that. The monster home down the street that has 6 apartments in it, they don't pay that because it's illegal and it's not above board. So if they were legally licensed as a apartment building, then they could report the fact that they had people living there, and then they could pay GE tax.
Well, actually, but anyone who rents property is supposed to pay GE,
yes,
period, regardless
correct.
of whether you're in an AMX zone or an A2
yes,
zone or
correct.
R5 or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of solving the affordable housing crisis in Hawaii, I think that the state of Hawaii, we need to look at using the substantial resources that we have in terms of land. Like, we actually have a lot of land that we could work with. And, there are absolutely issues that we need to work through in terms of making sure that the 20% pro rata share is paid to the Native Hawaiian community, those kinds of issues. But I believe that we can deal with all of that. I would like to see us take the amount that we paid to Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which is a very much delayed allocation of, I think, $500 or $600 million, and not require them to use that money, within a couple of years. Given the decades, frankly, that we've been waiting in the Native Hawaiian community for monies to be provided for infrastructure and for housing development. But DHHL is one of the best ways for us to make sure that local people are housed.
Thank you very much. All right, Ikaika, the next question is yours. While the recently enacted income tax credits, Act 46, were touted to be historic, many opine that these tax cuts are only election year kabuki and that the state must reverse or revise these cuts next year to ensure that we have enough revenues. What are your thoughts?
I don't think we should reverse the cuts. I think the cuts are a good first step. They are, on the other hand, kind of small for working class families. The average tax savings for working class families is $300. It's 20 times that if you were a middle or upper income earner. So I would like to see us always find ways to solve for working class families first. But the bigger problem that, if we zoom out a bit, what we see is that in the years, 2030 going forward, is we're going to have to cut between $1 billion to $1.4 billion out of the state budget. And the state budget, all told, is about $19 billion. So we're looking at a pretty substantial cut. And, it's like what Carole and I were talking about a minute ago about our public schools. How are we going to pay for the things we need to pay for our public schools if we also have to cut $1 billion out of the state budget? And so I think it's really important that we find ways of making that tax cut, the 2024 tax cut, revenue neutral, meaning that we have a tax cut, but we find other ways of filling the gaps in the state revenue. And I believe that we need to investigate, discover, and also execute ways of taxing the ultra rich that are moving to Hawaii and are finding Hawaii to be an excellent paradise for them, but not for the rest of us. And so, for instance, we have Mark Zuckerberg, who bought 600 acres on the island of Kauai. We have Larry Ellison, who bought an island and managed to not pay anything in conveyance taxes in that transaction. So to me, those are all pukas, you know, in our potential tax revenue that we need to be filling. And I do think that there's an appetite for that, and also the right people, you know, at DOTAX and elsewhere that can help us figure that out. We have a lot of really smart people working on these problems.
Thank you. Carole?
I think that the tax bill that I wrote went further. I think that you need to give people back money that we are taking too much. Honestly, I appreciate the fact that when Rep. Luke became, now Lieutenant Governor Luke became chair of finance, that she axed all the vacant positions out of all of the different departments. Our departments are, the way the state works is we build something, it works for a while, we need to change it, we add on. And then it works for a while, and then we add on, but we never go back and reevaluate and reduce and bring back to, okay, that was great, this part worked, that didn't work, we'll get rid of the part that didn't work, and then we'll build forward. So I think that our state could be better be better with their budget, and there's a lot of duplication and waste in the way things are done, because we don't ever go back and evaluate. At one point, there was a talk of doing zero-based budgeting. So instead of taking where you are and adding, going back to zero and defending why you need all of this money, start at zero and build forward. I think things like that are needed to streamline some of the things that are going on. I don't think we should be funding advertising Hawaii. If you are in that business, you advertise, but really the state shouldn't be advertising Hawaii. Hawaii sells itself. If people come, even in COVID, when it was locked down, they came. And so I tend to be more on the smaller government side and taking less from people so that we can meet the smaller government.
Thank you. All right, Carole, the next question is yours. While we continue to hear of workforce shortages, we also hear increased poverty in our communities. What are your plans to address job insecurity? What steps, if any, will you take to address workforce shortages and poverty?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that those two things are connected. Yes, there's a workforce shortage. Just go into any place where people do business and you will see a "I'm hiring" sign. So what's missing is the pathway from school into a job, or from one job into another job. And I don't think that there are definitely people looking for work, but they may not have the skills. I'm always encouraging my friends that are my younger ones that are coming up and thinking about the future to think about the trades. The trades are good work. You can get paid to go to school. You get a better salary than most people come out of college with, and you can afford to live here and support your family. But instead, we say, oh, everybody goes to college. If you can't make it to college, that's it. So I think that it's more about training, again, resourcing our students, resourcing the people in our community. Do you need training? One of the ones that I love to see is, I live down the street from Mauna Kea, and there's a big sign that says, if you want to be a CNA, come see us. We'll train you for free and then give you a job. Okay, so, but that's not easy work. That's hard work. So I don't think that it's that the opportunities aren't there, but we need to encourage people to step into them, encourage people to do that. I have friends who've been on different kinds of subsidies, government subsidies for different reasons. They can't leave the subsidy because the job they would get would be less than what the subsidy is. It's that puka, right? So you fall off the cliff, and then there's no way to keep going. So if we can help people to transition from one to the other, I think we would have a better workforce.
Thank you, Carole. Ikaika, go ahead, please.
I think the best vehicle and the best kind of force that we have for lifting up the working class people in our community is unions. That's really the strongest component in our society for addressing the lived experience of the working class. And so I think it's really important that we as the government actually uphold collective bargaining. We uphold, for instance, safe staffing ratios for critical industries such as nursing. So there's that one piece. I do also want to mention that poverty is a real problem in Hawaii. 44% of our population, of our 1.4 million or so people, are ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So they have a job, but they do not have the advancement potential. They're not building wealth. They're not building generational wealth in particular, which is what we know is so important for families. And so I think that we need to approach this problem, kind of with a all of government approach. This has to be something that it should consume our attention, because 44% is pretty darn close to being a majority of our population. So we live in an incredibly unequal population. And just to put some kind of some human faces on this, in Hawaii, we have both billionaires, right? And we know their names. They live in our communities. And then we also have people whose islands were literally bombed by the United States, and they are now economic and kind of health refugees here in Hawaii. We have these two extremes, and we need to solve for the vast majority of our population, which needs our help.
Thank you very much. All right, the next question comes from Doug.
Okay, this has been touched on a little bit before. And speaking of budget and revenue, during the COVID lockdown, a lot of us realized that Hawaii is seriously over-touristed and called for legislation to manage tourism rather than just blindly promoting it. Is limiting and managing tourism a priority for you, or is tourism still the goose that lays the golden egg?
And I'm up, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So, what's interesting is a friend of mine is a legislator who was active during the territorial and early state, kind of era. And he was part of the conversation about how we need tourism because it's a better alternative than the sugar plantations and and pineapple. I think it's always interesting to kind of look at things historically. I do not believe that tourism is the golden goose. Is that the term? And I would love to see us, for instance, decrease the number of tourists that we bring to Hawaii, but dramatically increase the amount that they spend on a per capita basis, so that we can, maintain or even increase revenues, but decrease the overall kind of impact on our streets, on our hiking trails, on our beaches, et cetera. And there's ways of doing it. Governor Green talks about a green fee. I think that's a neat idea. And so, yes, limiting, managing tourism, taking a regenerative approach. That's one of the things that we talked about in Aina Aloha Economic Futures, which is a group that came out, that kind of came into existence during COVID as an attempt to think through some potential alternatives, ways of rethinking tourism, our dependence on tourism, and other industries that we can be looking at. I'm a big fan, actually, of manufacturing. I think that industrial capacity is something that we have not had for decades. We actually really need it. We need to start thinking of Hawaii as being sort of a world unto its own. How do we take care of our own needs? How do we provide for our own food, our own energy, and take sort of an approach that would make, that I think is very, very similar to our brethren in Japan or New Zealand, other island nations that have taken an economic independence strategy and moved that forward.
Thank you.
I'm not sure. I think it's the goose that laid the golden egg. We definitely have had lots of gold laid on us. I appreciate tourism, but I don't think it should be our sole focus. So that there should be some like I said earlier, the state should not be paying for tourism, to advertise tourism. That makes no sense to me, because the state doesn't advertise anybody else. Anyway, coming back to your question, I think that we need to diversify our economy, and that I'm a strong proponent of agriculture. I agree with Ikaika about manufacturing, but until we change some of the problems with our shipping, we will never be able to compete, because if you're bringing in raw materials, we can't compete on price. It just is crazy. But we do have a lot of things that are, I think, rather than working on what can we export, what can we make for our use? We can grow food for our use. We can manufacture for our use. We can build for our use, rather than, we want to be an exporter, because until shipping changes, that's going to be really, really hard to do. Just price wise, we don't compete. And so I'm not in the tourism boat, but I don't want to sink it. I'm in a diversify our economy as best we can, to support our folks, to support the people here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Carole, you take this next question. In June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of anti-camping laws and banning people from sleeping in public places. Some say this Supreme Court decision made it easier for communities to address the problem of the homeless sleeping and living on the streets and in parks. What do you think of this federal decision?
I think that public spaces should, when I grew up, there were vagrancy laws. You couldn't just hang out somewhere. You were removed. If you had some kind of an issue and some reason that you were put there, you ended up there. There was support that came around you to find out how to solve that problem. I kind of support removing encampments, because, how should I say it? Encampments that prohibit others from using. So do I totally appreciate what Twinkle has done out in Waianae and what's happening in Waimanalo? Absolutely. But do I support the homeless encampment under the bridge at Liliuokalani Park that has been there for at least 10 years? I do not. So I think that there is a sense of, we need to solve the problem, but we can't let people, I'm having a hard time saying this. The public should be able to enjoy the spaces that are ours, our public spaces, and it should not be from people who are who've made it their home, and that we need to solve that problem. I'm not sure that, I think that if we would solve the housing problem, that our homeless problem obviously would go down. But I'm not fully on board with just let people go wherever they want and stay wherever they want for as long as they want. I don't think it's healthy for them. I don't think it's safe for the community. I think it also increases the amount of crime that happens in a neighborhood.
Thank you, Carole. All right, Ikaika?
Yeah, thank you, Carole. I think if we were to go today and talk to any of the individuals at Liliuokalani Park, or living in that overpass, I think that we would also find that they don't want to be there either. I think that they would much prefer to have their own home, that they could close the door on and have a safe, sound sleep in, and not worry about crime from other houseless individuals, not worry about being bothered by the police, and being allowed to kind of live their own lives, like I think everyone does. Everyone wants essentially self-determination. So I think what Auntie Twinkle did in Waianae is really instructive because it was an effort to address houselessness and homelessness, but it came from those individuals. It was them figuring out their own approach. Ultimately, it required no government intervention whatsoever, right? They were able to raise their own private money, and they bought land. They're building their own housing. They have their own design. Their work has laid the foundation for what governor is doing around the Kauhale program that former Representative Mizuno is working on. And I think it even goes even farther because it's not just transitional housing, it's actually permanent housing. And so I think there's a lot that we could learn from Auntie Twinkle. And I just want to say in closing that I don't think that the frankly, it's the Trump Supreme Court, right, which is pulling down these ideas which don't make sense here in Hawaii. They don't make sense in a lot of the United States, but I particularly resent their moving into our own ways of thinking. Like, for instance, we have our own laws. We have, for instance, the law of the splintered paddle, which said that you shall not be accosted for sleeping on the street. You know, it's one of the earliest human rights laws. That's our rule from Kamehameha himself. So, you know, we need to approach this in a way that really respects our own history and our own culture, our people.
Thank you, Ikaika. All right, the next question is yours. Let's see. Hawaii is the only state not to have a fire marshal. Senate Bill 2085, signed into law this year, will reestablish the state fire marshal position, which was eliminated in 1978. This position has yet to be filled and hopefully will be filled next year. By next year, what will you do to ensure that all important agency and department positions have the right leadership?
Is that for me, Carole?
Yes.
Okay.
It's for Ikaika.
Okay. So, I'm not certain if either Carole or I would really have an opportunity to weigh in on that, because I think a lot of those appointments are run through the Senate, actually. But I do think that we could play a role in simply making sure that the right people apply and making sure that, you know, because there are a lot of really amazing leaders just in Kalihi, just in Kapalama, that have the Ike, the intellect, the experience that would be super valuable, you know, in these key leadership positions for the state. And so, you know, sort of on an informal basis, I think we should make sure that the right people apply. The second thing is make sure that those positions are funded, make sure that their agencies are properly funded, so that they not only have the job, but also the resources to, you know, to execute on the mission of their respective work.
Thank you, Ikaika. Carole?
Yeah, I mean, the House has little say. Personally, you can have conversations, you can support someone, but the Senate really does the appointments. But like Ikaika said, it's finding people and encouraging them to step up to that position, that role, helping people understand the importance of it and what it means to be civically engaged and how it impacts not just their family, but all the families, the community. And it's kind of what I see in people running for office. There are quite a few people who had no competition this year. They're walking into office after the primary. They're elected, and in that you're basically saying, "Oh, do whatever you want. We don't care. You're good." And so, but to get someone to go through that gauntlet to actually run for office, to do what it takes to get there is hard. And so I think we need to teach more about civics, about why you invest, it used to be you worked for the state, you worked for the county because of your retirement. I don't think the latest generation cares. That's not their focus. They're not looking to work 30 years in the same job and end up with a retirement. So there has to be a change in how people understand what it means to serve your community. And so but on the practical level, the House does not vote, but individuals can be involved.
Thank you. All right, the next question is a rather long question, so you might want to look at your chat box. The Insurance Commissioner's Office has not shielded the residents of Hawaii from unaffordable and possibly predatory property insurance rate increases, putting more and more homeowners at risk of having to sell or lose their homes. Rate increases of 400% and more are being seen at condominium associations throughout Hawaii. The governor proclaimed an emergency, and the Insurance Task Force suggested assistance for condo owners through the Hawaii Hurricane Relief Fund and Hawaii Property Insurance Association. What do you suggest to ameliorate the condo insurance crisis?
I just had this conversation today with our insurance provider, and we were talking about the issues involved in how more and more, it's not just even the rates, many insurers are no longer servicing Hawaii, that there's just no one to choose from. And then that's a problem if you want to purchase a property, or if you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. And I don't know that I can't say that I have solutions. Honestly, I don't know. I don't understand fully all the ramifications. The questions I had were, is this just Lahaina? But no, it started before Lahaina. I asked, well, what about California? California has been having fires that have burned down whole communities for years. What's going on there? And they said there's no insurance in California. All the insurance providers left. I was like, okay, so is that what's happening here? Yes. Can we legislate someone has to use their business to provide insurance? I don't think we can, but there has to be something. For instance, if I, as an insurer, am insuring your house to be rebuilt if it burns, then, and I know it's going to take 3 years to get a permit, and it's going to cost triple the amount of money because it's going to take that long to get a permit, I don't want to be involved with that. If we can bring down the cost of housing, that should help with insurance. That doesn't necessarily translate as well into the condo market, because it's, you have your new buildings, you have your old buildings, they have different needs. So I can't say that I have a solution. If there was an easy solution, I think it would have already been done.
Thank you very much, Carole. Ikaika?
I do happen to have some background in this. And my sense is that what's going on in the condo insurance market is a function of the broader impacts of climate risk across the entire property insurance industry. Because what we're seeing is not limited to Lahaina or Hawaii. It's in California, like Carole mentioned. It's also in Florida. It's in places with high incidence of climate-related disaster, hurricanes, wildfires, et cetera. And so what we want to make sure is that we create a policy that doesn't use public monies to moral hazard, the problems of moral hazard, where you essentially you protect activity not be happening, but they suddenly happen because we have, like, for instance, with the U.S. flood insurance program, we have developments in flood zones. We don't want that. I do think that there's both it could either be sort of a private sector approach or a public sector approach, but it's specifically to create a new kind of property insurance that functions the way that, for those of you on the call who have whole life or universal life insurance, those are life insurance policies which maintain a cash value, and then the policy owner is able to borrow against that cash value in order to, do whatever they like. I think that we need to develop a kind of property insurance program, and again, it could be private or could be public, which allows for the monies that people pay in premiums to amass and then be borrowed against for the kind of climate-related risk mitigation work that we need. For instance, for buildings that need to put sprinklers in, that's something that we should be able to pay for through by borrowing against the premiums that we're paying into our respective property insurance account. And so I think there's something that we need to do there, and it actually could be a business opportunity for a private company.
All right, thank you very much. And the next question is yours, Ikaika. What are your views on ethics in our state government? And would you introduce and support more ethics reform legislation if elected? Do you support campaign contribution limits? What do you think of the results of the commission to improve standards of conduct? What steps, if any, will you take to instill ethics and address corruption in our legislature?
Yeah. My position on ethics is it would be great if we had some. And I say that as a joke, but I mean, I just got out of a very hotly contested primary where the issue on the table was really about nepotism. And that's a real problem. My understanding is that the House of Representatives actually had to suspend its own anti-nepotism rule in order to allow for the particular hiring practices to take place, which allowed for my race to happen. So I don't want to, we're not going to name names, but so yes, I do support all of the ideas that came out of the Foley Commission. I think that those are all really important. Campaign contribution limits. I actually think that we should fund a public the public financing of elections, that entire program. I think we should fund it by assessing a fee on high net worth campaign accounts. The candidates that are accruing, essentially a war chest. Why not take a fee out of that and use that to fund, let's fund democracy. Democracy would be really great. And so yes, I support ethics reforms, absolutely.
Thank you. Carole?
I was part of the legislature at the time, so I sat through all the Foley hearings. And the thing that really stopped me in my tracks was prosecutors on all three islands all said that they've been told not to prosecute someone that did something wrong. And they said that on the record in a hearing. So I think that it's broader than just putting band-aids on things. I think that we have to get down to a basic fact, but every single one said, if we want to prosecute something, we slyly hand it off to the feds because they can't be told to stop, but we have to stop because somebody comes into our office and says, don't do this. So yeah, I support most of the recommendations. There's a few like public financing. I'm not sure that's going to make a difference. I think that there is a finance mechanism already. It's useful. It's not necessarily going to, I should have looked up how many people have actually won using public financing. It's not the panacea that's going to solve all problems. But I think we have to get down to a more basic thing of the corruption in the background that stops people from prosecuting crime that they know is happening.
Thank you very much. All right, the next question goes to Carole, and it's from Dale.
Hey, aloha. Thank you for joining us today. Simple question. Wait a few seconds to answer. Will you be willing to write a bill or a policy requiring people submitting testimony on proposed legislation to declare conflicts of interest and to speak truthfully to the best of their knowledge? Thank you.
Sure. I don't know that that's going to change anything, except you might if you, one of the things that we started writing in our legislation was a clause that says, I know what I'm saying is true to my knowledge, because then the federal government can come in and say you broke the law because you knew that it was wrong. So will it change behavior? I'm not sure. Does it change anything on the actual testimony side? I don't think so. Does it change people's votes? Not in the last decade that I've been there.
Thank you. Ikaika, your response?
So Dale, I think that's a really interesting idea. And I think the one way that we can accomplish your idea is by adding it into the rules of the House of Representatives. So it becomes just like part of the operating system by which the entire entity operates. You know, because we could do that. You know, the House rules govern everything from, you know, who gets to speak in what time in the agenda. All of those things are all parts of the rules that we vote on, as far as I understand, really early in the legislative session. So let's make that a rule change.
Thank you.
Thank
Lila, you are muted.
Thank you. This will be the last question, and it comes from Doug. After this question, you will both be allowed up to 2 minutes to wrap up. So Doug, please go ahead.
Quick one. Ceded Lands came up during the Mauna Kea issue. Now it has come up with the issue of military leases in Kahuku, Kawailoa-Poamoho, and Makua. What is your position on the renewal of these leases?
So I'd like us to approach the entire conversation around the military leases from the perspective of economics. And I'd like us to start by looking at the opportunity cost, you know, the lost economic activity that we have not been able to achieve or take advantage of over the last century because of the military use of those lands. So for instance, when I think about Makua Valley, right, it's not far from Makaha. They're very similar areas. But I think that if Makua, which used to be a town, right, there was a church, there were people who lived there. If Makua had been allowed to develop in its own way, similar to how Makaha had developed, then the current, like, you know, GDP of Makua or the property values of Makua would be roughly equivalent to Makaha. And so I think the conversation with the military should be starting with that kind of number. You know, it's like the lost opportunity cost plus the cleanup cost, I think gets us to a number where we say, okay, you know what, you want it for $1. We think we're owed, let's say it's $20 billion. I'm just coming up with that from my mind. But at least when we do it that way, we're engaged in an actual negotiation. It's not you want $1, we want $2. Let's have a serious conversation with the U.S. military about the appropriate economics for these areas. The other thing is we should be talking about places like Fort Shafter. Fort Shafter, which is direct, you know, just right next door to our district, is a beautiful area with wonderful buildings, and I think there's a golf course and a theater, and it's quite nice. And as far as I can tell, it's sort of underutilized. And you know, Fort Shafter was taken from Hawaii during the territorial period, and I think we need to have a conversation about restoring it to civilian use.
Thank you. Carole?
Yeah, I think that the military brings it is an economic driver here. I think it's number 2 from tourism in the military. I appreciate the fact that we have a military that protects us, but I do think that there's some use of land use that it's not necessary anymore, that it's not needed, and it needs to revert back to use for Hawaii. Again, that's a long process, right? Koho'olawe. They've been working on it most of my lifetime in getting it to a place where it can be used again. I think that the military should be responsible for restoring property to usable land. And I'm not kick them all out tomorrow, right? I think that there's we live in a different age than when most of those areas were set up as military use. It's not we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a global world that is moving to space for war for general purposes. So I think that there's a lot of land that could be given back to Hawaii, but I want to make sure that when it's given back, it's usable.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll go to our closing statements. Carole, and Ikaika in that order, and you have up to 2 minutes. Thank you.
I just want to thank you all for allowing us to come on and to discuss. Your questions made me think. You said that they would be very specific, and I appreciate that. And I think that's the kind of engagement I want to see in the community, is people who are asking hard questions, who want to know answers, who are not just, it's not just a popularity contest. It's not just, oh yeah, whatever they do, I don't know how it impacts me. I want to see people engaged in the process. I do want to see people testifying at the legislature. I do want to see people saying, hey, we need a solution to our condo insurance problem. I do want people to speak up and to be involved in the process, because I think the process is better when we have more voices involved. So I appreciate you folks allowing us this time, and I look forward to more people being engaged. And I want to be one of those people who speaks for my neighborhood. On my street, 5 languages are spoken. They don't have time to go testify at the legislature. I want to be the person who says, hey, did you think that when you close the coal plant, you were going to triple the electric bill? Maybe we could wait until they're ready, right? Nobody said that. It never was mentioned. And so my neighbors all of a sudden had an electric bill that they couldn't afford, right? So I want to be that voice that says, yes, I understand what you're trying to do, but have you considered this community? Have you considered the neighbors? Have you considered my, like Ikaika said, the generations? 3 houses around me have generations from the first owners, those who first moved in when it became a subdivision. And so I just look forward to representing them in the legislature.
Mahalo, Carole. All right, Ikaika, your closing statement, please.
Can everyone hear the Time's Up music? I think it's delightful. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. This is a really important election year, and all election years are important, but this one in particular, because among other things, what's up for debate and what's up for vote is really the future of democracy itself. And what I see happening at the national level really gives me pause when I think about, that for instance, we have candidates who are not going to respect the outcomes of elections, or are trying to change the electoral laws right now, which restrict democratic access to ballots and polls. So I'm really grateful to organizations like Kokua Council, which are advocates for democratic action and democratic involvement. So thank you very much. And make sure you vote November 5th. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And here's our president, Greg.
Hey, I just had to unmute myself. So on behalf of the Kokua Council, I want to thank both of the candidates for participating today. We appreciate your time to answer our questions, and we hope that this forum will help voters make their best choice when they vote. I also want to thank our directors for their work to organize these forums, and especially Lila Mower for moderating. We've had quite a few of and for this general election, and we hope that you can join us for upcoming. We've got I think, let's see, on our agenda we've got another one, I think, on this September today, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks,
for coming.
Thank you
Aloha.
for having us.
Aloha.
Mahalo nui.